Hello and welcome to the Open Door Philanthropy Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Moss. I'm sitting in a hotel room in Alexandria, Virginia, with Chandler Arnold. Thanks for coming to my hotel room, Chandler.
Happy to be here. Looking forward to talking more.
We're going to be talking about philanthropy and your role in it. But first, we're going to learn a little bit about you. And I'm going to dive right into that. What was your childhood like? What were you like when you were a little boy?
So I grew up in a very small town in rural western North Carolina in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Great place to grow up. Beautiful area, wonderful people. It's also very homogenous, very conservative, very religious.
Homogenous, so mostly Jews? large Buddhist population there?
More in the Protestant category. Religious diversity is kind of Baptist versus Methodist versus Presbyterian. And, you know, I was a little gay kid growing up in the Reagan era and the AIDS crisis. So there were some really challenging parts about that as well. But I had an incredible family and a wonderful, supportive group of friends. So I was really lucky. And that, you know, that background in good and challenging ways influenced a lot of how I look at life.
We are approximately the same age. And it was a difficult time to... I'm not a little gay boy. But I was, just for like being tolerant of it, right? You could get beat up.
Yep.
It was a particularly hostile situation. Like I would often defend, right, some of my friends, and you instantly, like, then I'm gay too. It doesn't matter, right? And they're getting taught a lot of hate at home, so you can't really blame those other kids. It was a tough time, and I'm glad that you got out of it. You seem to be pretty happy, and you're married with a husband.
Yes, we have two young children, a 7-year-old and a 1.5-year-old, and it's funny as now the parent of a little boy this age. When I was growing up, like unlike my, the small number of people in my community who might have been Native American or Black, you couldn't obviously look at me and tell that I was gay. Now I did have the words to all of Madonna's Vogue written in a silver glitter pin on a poster in my room. So I guess if you look closely, you might have known, but. I discovered early on that I could sort of in some ways pass in these mainstream social circles, but I knew that my wiring was different on the inside and kind of felt at a young age that I had sort of a responsibility to try to help other folks that might have been dealing with some of the same challenges. So I hadn't really thought about that until I returned home a couple weeks ago for a project. It's interesting to see how those formative experiences do shape us in conscious and unconscious ways.
Were there things there in North Carolina that you did enjoy growing up?
Oh my God, so many things. It's an incredibly beautiful natural environment. Hiking, I was an Eagle Scout, hiking, camping, swimming. As I mentioned, my family, incredible humans, very, very close to. So lots of wonderful things. And those challenges.
Eagle Scout's quite an accomplishment.
Thank you. My father was one as well.
I did not make it.
My dad encouraged me to do it. I got it at 13. He encouraged me to do it.
For those who may not be familiar, this means you got a large number of badges.
A large number of badges, a large number of projects.
How many badges is it to be an E? Do you remember the specifics?
I don't remember.
What was is there a badge that the skills from which you still use today? You starting fires out there?
We do. Our family does camp. We took our 1-year-old camping with her pack and play. There wasn't a camping with a pack and play merit badge though. But I did learn a lot of skills. But I think it was less the skills and more sort of a respect for the environment, an interest in sort of working with all types of people. Those are the things that stay with me.
And just sort of a basic respect for capability, I think, right? Like, I like the badge system. And in fact, there have been some efforts in education to bring that back. It's pretty much always just like getting your graphic design badge so that they can hire like teenagers. So, do you remember the first time that you made a gift or did something generous?
So tithing was a big part of our experience. So I remember when my sister and I first got an allowance in exchange for a number of additional chores. I think it was $2.10 a week, and we agreed to give 10% of that away. So since my earliest days, some notion of using
It's 21 cents.
it yes, yes, and I think my dad like matched it, so we would give 50 cents to the church offering or whatever it was every week. And his point was, it's not about the amount of money; it's about the philosophy and the sort of
50 cents a week adds up.
it totally
over the
adds up.
years.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. Um, um, yeah, so that's been a part a part of my perspective from a very young age. Now, I'm not donating that necessarily to a religious institution. Now, I'm using my personal philanthropy in other ways, but the philosophy has always been there.
Yes, like as a habit. This is very similar to what Jews have a tzedakah box and some other things, and a lot of it's just about like the habitual nature of it. And I think most of the fundraisers at home will agree that like if you want to give more than once, that's generally welcome.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you went to is that what you went to school out there? Did you go to public school in the Blue Ridge Mountains?
I went to public school in McDowell County, North Carolina, public school all the way through graduation. Fantastic education, really wonderful teachers, really lucky and fortunate. Also come from a family of educators. My mother and grandmother and sister are all teachers. So the sort of concept of education was a very important one.
The women are teachers?
Coincidentally, these women are
what do the
teachers.
men do?
My dad is an entrepreneur. So in many ways, I'm sort of a combination of the two of them. I was a social entrepreneur who's focused on education. So I guess I come by it honestly.
Yeah. Both my parents are teachers, lecturers, in fact, which is why I talk a lot. So you've mentioned the church a few times. Was it you were a Protestant? What were you
grew up in a Baptist church.
Sorry, you didn't want the sermon in Latin? That was very important too.
Well, actually, my church had something at the time called Priesthood of the Believer, which my family really appreciated. And that notion in the Baptist church at that time, I think that's maybe not. I don't know if this church currently abides by that doctrine anymore, but
they're not listening.
Yeah. it basically the concept was that each person can have an individual relationship with God. They can read the Bible, interpret it themselves, and make their own decision, as opposed to a priest or a pastor telling them what the Bible means.
Yeah, that's Protestantism.
My family,
as I understand.
Yeah, my family really liked that. And as churches went in the community at the time, ours was quite liberal. So my mother was a deacon. We had a woman minister, which was pretty unusual in the community at that time.
So you also mentioned that you don't donate. You still have the habit of giving, but not to the church.
Correct.
Where do you donate, or what sort of causes?
A lot of our philanthropy now is focused on things like, as with many people, things that are very personal to us. So a lot of my giving is focused on education, access, equity, queer causes. But it's changing over time. So I would say that my husband and I donated in those areas, largely for the past 15 years or so. Our son is now 7, and he wants to be an entomologist focused on ants. And fighting climate change. So he is very, very focused on that topic. And as we have conversations about giving over the last few years, he's really been encouraging us to think more about climate change, which is, of course, something I'm in agreement with him about that.
Yeah, so. I hear like they're like, I'm really focused on climate change. Like, yes, I too want to live.
What's not to love about saving the planet?
I enjoy breathing and
big fan.
Seeing the outside.
So it's been rewarding to have early stage conversations with him about things that we can do, not only in our own practices, but in terms of the modest giving that we're able to do to help him have a part in sort of choosing those causes as well.
Are you in some way helping him build the habit? Is there a version of tithing? Does he give 10% of his allowance?
Well, he doesn't get an allowance yet, Dave. But that we actually are talking about that right now. And about volunteering as well. So trying to sort of pair action with giving and ways that he can help. So he's just written a letter to President Biden, sharing some thoughts and ideas. So trying to
Letting
think
about climate change. Finally, the president
he's sharing some facts. There's also a very strong crayon-based picture.
Those things, they track all the letters that come in, and they use the volume on particular issues to prioritize. In fact, it's a very small amount of impact. If there were no letters arriving there about please do something about climate change, right? Then they'd have all the more reason to not. They can say there's no one's asking us.
No one's asking, and we want him and especially our daughter to know that they have a voice and that they can use that voice.
Very cool. All right, so eventually you left. What was the name of the town? Is it still there?
It is still there.
Did it have a name?
Marion, North Carolina.
Marion?
Just off the Blue Ridge Mountain.
So eventually you left.
Yes.
Because you're here now in Alexandria. So, I assume you left for school?
I did. I went to Harvard for college.
Harvard.
I think they might have thought that I would show up with straw in my hair and barefooted. But I had a tremendous time. I only about 20% of my high school graduating class goes to college. Only 3 of us went out of state my year. So it was a sort of a big journey for me. But I had a tremendous time and learned a ton. Probably more outside of the classroom than inside the classroom, but the classroom stuff was pretty great too.
Did you know there's a guy out there named Bill Harvard, and he's like the descendant of the founder of Harvard?
I did not know that. The first donor, I guess, who we named the school after.
He's not he's not actually the founder.
Right.
That was the same thing. I
think it was founded by.
I don't think Dickinson's the founder of Dickinson either.
Right. I think. This is to the point that philanthropists have a lot of power. I think it was founded by the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which became, of course, Massachusetts.
Yeah, long time, like 1620 or something.
Yeah, 1636, and the first donor had the last name Harvard and named the school after.
Yeah, so I guess that guy's So there's a bill. I once won a bet on that.
Oh yeah,
that there were descendants of Harvard alive, right? No, and the bet was also that one of them's a lawyer.
Well,
that we'll be able to find him on a law firm's page.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we found William Harvard IV. He's practiced. I'm sure he's a great guy. It is interesting to think that someone's philanthropy in 1636, which is quite a long time ago, right, could lead to that family's name becoming so ubiquitous and eventually a $50 billion fund. Something we talked about on the podcast several times, right? It is larger than a lot of grant-making institutions. And anyone interested in a deep dive on that can find plenty of criticism. My general question is how much of that, you're coming from Marion, and at the time it was not $50 billion, but many billions of dollars in the fund, and growing precipitously. What did you think Harvard was? How did you think they paid for all the fancy buildings and teachers and everything? Was it all you thought that they took tuition and that's what ran the school?
I think it's hard to sort of think back to my 18-year-old self.
I guess I didn't know anything. I was dumb and I didn't know anything.
Right. I mean, I knew that I was taking out some loans and the tuition check seemed really large, and I probably assumed that paid for everything. As I went through the experience, I think I came to understand more about the larger institution that is Harvard, which does a lot of tremendous things, and has a tremendous endowment, which, I'm not against, though with my personal giving, I feel like, my incremental X is not really going to change that $53 billion. They're not going to need to up it to $54 billion because of what I'm giving. So, I tend to do a lot of, our 25th reunion is coming up, so I was on a call with them yesterday, encouraging my classmates to put together a panel on the sort of nexus between financial means, philanthropy, and social impact. And so I'm sort of pushing to create this conversation as a big part of the reunion. So I find that now my involvement is less as a financial contributor and more as a sort of social change advocate, trying to work with them to engage their professors and students and alums in social change activities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, in general, I think that's just an awful lot of money to be in one place. And I think the utopic vision is that it would be spread a little bit more evenly than that. However, right, like money is in large funds.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's probably not the largest fund in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so maybe it gets disproportionate criticism because it's Harvard and out there like that. Like they're stewarding $50 billion as responsibly as any other current steward of that much money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they have done, I believe they've divested from oil and done many other like things that
and they're making
some of the other enormous fund managers are scoffing at.
That's true. That's true. And I think they're making steps towards making tuition, free or more affordable to an increasing percentage of the population. Could they do more? Yes.
It sounds like enough that they would do. I mean, I haven't done the math, but that's an awful lot of money.
Yeah.
It seems like perhaps the tuition, right? But then asking them for money afterwards is the and you were like, I believe they do student pledge drives. So people who have had to take out loans in order to go to this thing, to then ask them for more money. I wonder do they have a number where they would stop?
It's a great question. And it's like,
have they ever thought about it? I mean, because it's got to be soon.
It's true. and Harvard's not the only one that wrestles with that question.
Yeah.
I ran fundraising for 15 years for a national nonprofit, and we thought about do we ask some of the organizations that we serve for donations? And it's not as easy an answer as you think it might be, because I remember one mailing, we took the recipients off the list. And if you reached out and said, hey, I do want to contribute, I was looking forward to that opportunity. My means are more modest, but wanting to give back isn't dependent on one's socioeconomic status necessarily. So it's a complicated question.
Well, that's certainly the one. I know a lot of, with Dickinson, I've done some work trying to, I don't think my classmates should give to Dickinson. They have billions in the endowment, but not as much as Harvard. But it's also a much smaller situation. Mm-hmm. And their tuition's super high, and they're charging it to whoever wants to pay it, really. But one of the responses I hear that I do respect is when they went there, they had a scholarship, and that scholarship was paid by people who donated, and that's very important to them. And that makes a lot of sense to me, right? That's their life, and I think a lot of us donate. Pretty much everybody who donates. It's going to be to something that you have some personal experience with, and that tugs at the heartstrings, which is important for fundraisers, especially this time of year, end of the year, to remember. Nostalgia is basically some sort of magic trick, like a charm, a spell.
And connection, I think.
It's why colleges like Harvard are so good at raising money, because obviously you're nostalgic about your Harvard experience. And I'm sure if you didn't enjoy your time at Harvard, you're less likely to donate there. Even if you ended up very successful in life and making a lot of money because of your Harvard degree, if you had a bad time socially there, I'm sure those people donate less. Right? Even if the financial giving back part makes sense.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think to fundraisers listening, connection and relationship are probably two of the most critical things that you can try to build and create with any fundraising outreach or document or conversation or speech that you ever give.
So did you study social entrepreneurship at Harvard?
Well, I studied.
You all take the same classes, right?
Well, at the time that I was there,
and you have concentrations.
Very good, very good.
Maybe you go to houses. Are there houses or something?
Yeah, it's you're getting all the inside terms right. At the time that I was there, about 25% of the classes were what they called core classes that everyone took.
25%.
25 that everyone took some subset of, and then you had your major, which Harvard calls a concentration, and then electives. And my concentration was social change and American history and literature. So I looked at the women's movement, the education reform movement, civil rights, worked with an amazing professor, Robert Coles, who got the Presidential Medal of Freedom and was one of the early folks to advocate for incorporating public service into one's college experience. So while I've given Harvard a little bit of a hard time in some categories, I really want to commend them, because this was far before sort of public service in broad strokes on college campuses was as cool as it is now. And they were doing some really amazing work there. And a lot of what I learned came from that sort of synergistic incorporation of my public service experiences into the classwork that I was doing. And I give them a lot of credit for that.
So you are right. Social entrepreneurship, when I went to Dickinson, I don't think I would have known what that meant.
No, me either.
I do vaguely remember like the first time I heard it a few years later.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the context, GW had it as like a major. They might have been the first school to like have it as a major.
Mm-hmm.
And Alex Simon, one of our first board members, was a student there studying it at the time. But we had business. I'm trying to think, what would I have... theater, honestly, is the closest to social change class. That's what I majored in. It's probably the closest to social change that Dickinson offered. Because when we would talk about that with our, like, what's the purpose of this play? We're not just entertaining, right? Because I'm going to be honest, plays put on in college are not entertaining. So hopefully... And of course, my scenes were very entertaining.
Whether they were intended to be or not.
No, we did. There's a good theater department. We did some good work. But it is true that like you don't have to sell tickets.
Yep.
Right? So you get to do more academic, like weirder experimental work that like, and you cannot care if people in the audience didn't enjoy it.
Right.
Which actually a lot of people doing theater, that's what they want to do.
Absolutely.
Boy, I lost my train of thought there. So it was like, we're not that old, and it was newish to have the word social change in your concentration for you.
And the major, the concentration was actually American history and literature, and I sort of petitioned for a special focus within that work to focus on social change. So
sure.
Yeah, and you're right. Like even the term social, and
this is super trendy now.
Very sexy now. Very trendy now.
There are many postgraduate programs that offer degrees in philanthropy. Our managing director is pursuing her doctorate in philanthropy, which was not something when I graduated from college was not a thing you could get a doctorate in.
Correct.
I think maybe at IUP there might have been one program, but now there's like 76 places that'll let you do that, and plus a lot more that'll like let you design almost any program. And there's increasingly like specially set up programs on campuses. There's another school in Cambridge called MIT, and we had a large partnership with Solve for several years.
Exactly.
And it's a sort of a confluence of trends there. One of those trends is, I think, two that are very important for this conversation. Alumni are saying, what are you doing about social change? Show me the program that's about social. Great, you have patents. You've always had patents. Right? And also students, the best students, rising ones that are thinking about which school in Cambridge they want to go to, right? Which of the Ivy Leagues, like they want to know they care a lot about this stuff. They've grown up watching school shootings and inaction on climate change, and there's going to be something that they care about, and that's why they're going to school. So they need to hear it too. So we've seen since I was I'm sure Dickinson probably has something now. I'm sure there's an option for this. I'm sure it's bad. They're not qualified. Those people aren't qualified.
Well, and I think
they should have a how to keep things the same, like regression class.
Well, I think
I have no problem shitting on my alma mater.
I think these majors and concentrations are fantastic. And had there been one when I was there, I probably would have chosen it, right? But I do think
I kind of like it being through the American history angle. A lot of our folks that send us proposals could have more of a history background.
But I also think I like what Harvard and other schools are doing in terms of integrating these themes into what others might call more mainstream classes. So I think that economists and scientists and educators, giving them more information about social impact work and how it can be integrated into these other disciplines, just like we want to integrate, a greater lens on race and equity and diversity and a number of other things. I think that kind of cross-pollination is also really important as well. So in addition to the majors and concentrations, I love the work that a lot of institutions are doing to integrate these themes more holistically across the entire curriculum.
Yes. I like that as well. Very well said. As opposed to, there are some good things about SOLVE, but what I don't like about it is that it's an all-new thing. It, in fact, is not particularly integrated into like what was already happening at MIT. They hired new people, got a new office, started doing new challenges involving new folks, which is their strategy. They're trying to expand the number of people that they can engage with. And for all I know, there's some other office that is I don't know what's on the curriculum at MIT, right? But I've seen that's we've also partnered with GW, where they're doing both things. They have these like public pitch competitions and venture competitions, which to me are just sort of strange fundraising grabs. I've been the judge at so many of these that I'm no longer. I'm not. If anyone's interested, you're looking for judges for your like weird college pitch competition. No, thank you. I'm sure I can suggest some other reviewers for you. Like, if someone wants to start a social venture and they're an undergraduate or in a graduate school, that's great. And like, let's in fact look at their proposals and everything. But like, making it public and having members from the business community there, like these are like any of these are going to succeed. And maybe they will, but like statistically, no. So let's plan for and just because the business you came up with as an undergraduate or the nonprofit, your first nonprofit idea, right, wasn't a good one, like does not mean in fact you should be rewarded for trying it in the first place. It almost certainly is a bad one. My first 10 nonprofit ideas would not have worked, and some of them I tried in earnest. I know that they didn't. So I know that they wouldn't work. The first idea for Unfunded List was pretty bad. I got a lot of good critical feedback in the beginning and changed my idea to make it better, right? And the for colleges to provide that's very good, right? But like the what I've seen a lot of is basically like Shark Tank was one of the most popular shows on television. Their alumni are in this year, their students are in this year, and so their very quick idea is it's a Shark Tank on campus for social change. Right? There's probably thousands of those across campus. Some better planned. SOLVE's very meticulously planned. And MIT professors are designed, and the challenges and everything. Others were just like we'll call it Pitch George, and like look, the George Washington is wearing sunglasses in the logo.
Yeah, I totally hear you. In my experience with pitch competitions has more been in the business school context, in which the
postgraduate
pitchers
the graduate school ones are better.
They're a little more, they've got more life experience and more, so I'm all about getting young people engaged and getting them excited. I also love kind of the apprenticeship model, which is more of the path that I took, graduating, finding a social change group that's really well run, that inspires you, going there and spending a few years, working your butt off, learning a ton of stuff, getting incredible experience, so that when you go to graduate school or come up with your own idea, you have a little real world experience and context, just like, starting a private sector venture. You have more experience and context and relationships and network and knowledge to increase the likelihood that will be successful.
This is something very real for folks to learn. A lot of people think they're going to have very quick fundraising success. And by very quick, I mean within 5 years. Just to be clear, in my fundraising career, I spent 5 years entering data into databases, taking notes in meetings, printing thank you letters, signing someone else's name on them. I didn't do anything particularly real. I had to do that at the end of that 5 years. I knew a lot, and I was able to start doing some real stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if they had like, I wouldn't have been able to raise any money in my first year as a fundraiser on my own. I didn't know anything, and I came from I grew up in a college background. Like I had a lot of I knew a lot more than the average person about how philanthropy worked. Still, like this is real work. It's a real profession.
Yep.
You got to do it for a long time. There's a lot of training involved, and unfortunately, a lot of the nonprofits out there that need fundraisers are not going to be able to provide the training that these folks need. Tough career to get into. Mm-hmm. And again, you got this trend of a lot of these colleges being possibly over encouraging at the idea of starting new social ventures when their graduates should really go work at some of the existing. If they want their graduates to have strong social impacts, should be encouraging them to go work at existing social ventures.
This is something I talk about with our clients as well. I have a hesitation about encouraging people to sort of build parallel train tracks to the same goal, right? If there's already an organization doing fantastic work about XYZ in community ABC, why create another doing the same thing as opposed to collaborating or looking for synergies with that group? Because,
there's no pitch competition for that.
And maybe there should be. Maybe there should be a collaboration pitch competition. But
it would be convoluted, and that show would not be popular.
I hear you. Though there might be some innovative funders listening to this.
They like it. I made a 30-second pitch, and then I got $1 million, and now I'm selling sponges at Walgreens.
Yeah,
it's really simple.
But as you know, these questions are complex, and I know you, and I'm not looking for simple solutions. We're looking for real ways to drive real impact, right? So that's why I like what you were saying about.
There are some arguably simple solutions. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, if you want to see a cure for cancer, there are the institutions you should donate to. It's all very straightforward. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time on your efforts to use your money to aid cancer research. Mm-hmm. It's there, and for many other causes.
Yep.
They're there, they're doing the work, and we know who they are to fund, right? It may be a lot more complicated, but sometimes it is simple. And in fact, that's one of the things that I think might be frustrating for new fundraisers and new philanthropists. Mm-hmm. They're looking to make a splash, and it's actually what you get to do is swim laps.
Mm-hmm. 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 I hear that, and I think you're exactly right. And some of the folks that I work with, the challenge is not creating an institution that's doing powerful work in category A or B. It's figuring out from a personal perspective, what is the cause that they are most interested in? What is the focus that their family wants to have in terms of their impact? Question one. Then question two, which organization or combination of organizations in that space is driving real change, or real change and resonates in the categories they're interested in? And then maybe number three, how do you structure that in such a way that the donor finds the meaning on a personal level that they're looking for? But none of that is about inventing a new cancer research organization, because they're great groups that are doing that work.
If you were to try it, that would be a very silly thing to do. I don't care how good you are at any of it. Starting a new cancer research organization right now would be a very silly thing to do.
Yeah, and it would cost a ton of money and take a long time to even
and probably
catch up.
Harm the field of cancer research. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right? So you are a philanthropy advisor. Did you, when you were in Marion, is that what you knew you wanted to be? When people said, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Well, I don't even think I knew that such a thing existed. So, no. I wanted to be a children's book illustrator when I was my son's age. Books have always been things.
I remember Tommy DePaola.
Oh, yeah? Yeah.
Isn't he from North Carolina? Or he's from the South?
He has a connection.
I love those books.
Those books are incredible. Stregonona and others. I love books because, we lived in this pretty remote community, but they gave me the opportunity to imagine a world far beyond my front door. which actually is sort of what philanthropy does as well. But the answer to your question is that I wanted to be a children's book illustrator when I was a kid.
Well, there's a big connection between literacy and philanthropy, I think. So it has always been one of the large focuses of at least Western philanthropy. Perhaps in the beginning, the focus was to prevent them from learning to read. Philanthropy has evolved, right? So what did you did work with books. You didn't become a child. Can you draw? Is that the problem?
Drawing is not my strongest suit now, though I do enjoy doing it with my son. So I graduated college, and Dave, I didn't know then exactly what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to focus on progressive social change. I thought maybe law school, maybe public policy school, and I got a fellowship to the place called the Center for Law and Social Policy. And because it had the word law and the word policy in the name, I thought, perfect, let me go there. And CLASP, that organization, let me say, does incredible work. And I developed a huge respect for policy and sound policy and the underpinnings of that from a research perspective. I also discovered, as you know, Dave, I'm a fairly sort of extroverted, talkative people person. Writing and researching policy briefs was not my personal forte. But I was doing that work, and my roommate at the time, a buddy named Dave Green, was a journalist, and he came home and said, hey, I just interviewed this amazing social entrepreneur named Kyle Zimmer running a group called First Book. You should work there. And I was like, Dave, I don't tell you how to be a journalist. I've never heard of this First Book. Thanks for trying. But like a good friend, he wouldn't shut up. And he said, you really got to talk to her. And basically had lunch, fell in love with this social impact model, and quit my job the next day. So I was at First Book for about 18 years altogether. Took some time off to go to business school. Worked in the private sector a little bit at BCG and the Coca-Cola Company, and then came back. We gave away 165 million books during that time, and built up the social enterprise for that, and also managed our work with
They should change the name to 165 millionth book.
Well, now it's something like the 200 millionth book. 200 million.
Every time they give it, they should rebrand.
That's that branding change would be effortless, I'm sure.
I assume it's just called First Book because it's snappy. There's not like a specific.
Well, it actually comes from a poem. So it's not so much about the first book a child receives. It's a poem talking about the first book that sort of caught your imagination on fire. And a big focus of that, or I still say a big focus of that wonderful organization is connecting books to kids that resonate with them. So they have a big focus on increasing diversity in the publishing industry, increasing representation so that children can not only see themselves in the books that they read, but that little kids in communities like mine that are fairly homogenous can get introduced to kids with stories and backgrounds and experiences very different than their own. So it was a tremendous place, and to the sort of apprenticeship point, I learned a great deal during that time.
And for folks who want to hear more about your time at First Book, you were recently a speaker at our virtual symposium, and we talked a little bit there about what it's like to actually work at a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess 18 years was enough, right? And you decided you wanted to be you're going to be a giving advisor.
Yeah, I think, and hindsight is 20/20. I think I would certainly be lying if I said, as a 7-year-old in North Carolina, I wanted to found a group called Untraditional Philanthropy and do advising. But over the course of that time at First Book, I did learn a lot. I mean, a very successful organization, accolades from, Schwab and Skoll and CGI and case studies at Wharton and Yale. And so we had all the sort of accolades, but fundraising was still really, really hard. And, we were doing work with big donors and Fortune 500 companies. And I remember, we'd get $1 million gift, and I'd throw a sort of freaking ticker tape parade in the hallway. And then I'd go back to my desk and sit down at my computer and realize we needed to do that 24 more times that year. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I sort of took about 6 months and was really thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I was sort of saying to myself, dang it, like, I'm a privileged white man who went to Harvard and Stanford, and I have friends in senior roles at Goldman and these other banks, and it was still super, super hard for me to raise money. And if it's that hard for me, what about the black queer woman in Anacostia who's leveraging her GED in amazing ways to run her program, who doesn't have access to those conversations? It's sort of a Hamilton, like in the room where it happens, awakening. And I think honestly for a long time, and you may have had this experience, like I think when we started doing this work, I kind of separated my connections and sort of elite ties because I thought that it was more important to sort of focus on grassroots community building and working from the ground up. And I had a bit of a realization that, I wasn't bringing my full self to this work because I wasn't engaging these other parts of my personhood. And I was in a unique position to make connections to these large banks and affluent families and corporations, and what might it look like to reimagine philanthropy in those ways by bringing these funders and social entrepreneurs together in a way that might reimagine some of the power dynamics that had been challenging during those 18 years of First Book.
One major similarity between untraditional philanthropy and unfunded list.
Un.
First of all. And there's also, I don't know if you know Daniel from there's Unreasonable Institute. So the three of us should get together sometime.
That would be the Un.
Have a little Un club.
I love it.
We could have a conference and call it the Unference. I just thought that up.
I like it. I do like it.
And now we should do it.
And Un is a part of fun and fundraising. So there's all kinds of places that we can go.
There's a lot of wordplay that will happen at the Unference. I think anyone's buying a ticket to the Unference, and it'll be expensive. They'll know. They'll be expecting wordplay. But another thing is that you're maintaining a little pool of experts.
Yep.
And I have so over the years we've had over 900 people with various expertise read proposals. It's not so much. I kind of shy away from the word expert. Some of them are obviously experts. I do think whether you're an expert in something or not, your perspective has value. And so we provide, and everybody only has one perspective. It could be rich and deep, but it's one. And we provide people with the opportunity to hear from people who have other perspectives, which I think is just very, very important. If you're going to try to accomplish social change, you need as much perspective as possible.
100%.
Are you all familiar with the myth of Tiresias?
I do love Greek
He was
mythology.
the blind advisor to Oedipus.
Yes, and I love that sort of trope of the blind person being the only one that can see.
Well, he is, there's his story, which they don't think they mentioned in Oedipus, but like his myth, he went to Athena and prayed to be the wisest man in Greece. So first she transports him to Syria, and he has to live there for 7 years as an immigrant who doesn't speak the language. And then she transports him back to Greece, where he has to live there for 7 years as a woman. So he lives for 7 years as a woman. And then she turns him back into a man and makes him blind. And at this point, he's like, Athena, what are you doing to me? Why are you doing this? And she said, well, you wanted to be the wisest person in Greece, and now you are.
I love that. And I think it's so...
And he could see...
I kind of have chills.
He could predict the future by listening to birds.
And I think I love that so much because I think
he had so much perspective. The sounds of the birds would speak to him.
And let's be candid. I think that you and I are, for those of you, we're not on video, but we are both white men. We both have brown hair. We both have beards. Like, we're very similar, And for a long time, a lot of the people making a lot of the decisions about a lot of the money that went to a lot of the causes looked like us, and I think untraditional philanthropy is founded on the sort of belief that a diversity of opinions and perspectives is not just additive, it is sort of like opening stakes. So I'm super proud of the fact that 85% of our expert advisors are people of color, women, members of the queer community, and they're just freaking rock stars. I'm talking about like Alex Guerre, CEO of Donors Choose, Abby Falick, founder of Global Citizen Year, Dr. Catherine Wilkinson.
We reviewed one of Abby's proposals.
Exactly. And that's actually, shout out to you all, that's how I met Abby. So
really? Were you one of the reviewers?
I was one of her. You listed me as one of her
reviewers. I
had
to have the report discussion with them, and they showed up to it. It was the day after they got $10 million from Mackenzie's.
Exactly.
And they still showed up to talk about the critical feedback on that, and they were very interested to learn and get better. Even though they had $10 million, it literally fell on them from the sky. I wouldn't have blamed them if they were like, take your feedback and that is piss off, Dave. But no, they were that was one of the better discussions I've ever had, and it was neat to talk to them the day after that.
And that's just that's the type of person she is. She reached out and
that's a great resource to be able to connect to folks like that.
100%.
You're trying to make social change.
And we wouldn't have connected had it not been for your organization.
Cool.
And now she's an expert, and now she has recommended other experts like Priti Christel, who's the leader of IMAC. Priti just became a Genius Grant winner. So lest people listening think that these, the world is small. And I wasn't reading Abby's proposal because I thought that one day I would create something called Untraditional Philanthropy and she would be an expert, and she wasn't looking for anything when she reached out, but a lot of great synergies have come from that. And she's one example of, these great leaders, because I think to your point, Dave, I know a good bit about social impact models and earned revenue models and literacy and education from my time at First Book, but I'm not an expert on women's issues or climate change or, the judicial reform work that needs to be done in our country. But because this world is small and I've been doing this for 25 years, I've developed friends and contacts and people like you who know other people that could create this little consortium of folks for the right philanthropists. This is not for everyone, but for those that are open and curious about learning more, it's really proven to be pretty magical.
Yes. And just sort of fundamentally, even long before I started on Funded List, one of my tactics that I use with social change is to first talk to a bunch of people.
Yep.
I used to call it a listening tour.
Mm-hmm.
It was my first step for if I have a fundraising goal, right? I've been hired at a new job, right? My first thing at the new job was I wanted to talk to and I think this is everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody should do this. Talk to all of the stakeholders, because you obviously won't, and you're not going to agree with everybody you talk to, and because that would be weird.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And boring.
Super boring. Leave that place if everyone's all saying the same thing. You're certainly not going to make any change there.
Mm-hmm.
But and obviously you don't know what you don't know. I don't write my own feedback down because I have more than enough evaluators.
Mm-hmm.
I get a chance to talk to the folks.
Mm-hmm.
I know a little bit about a lot of things and quite a bit about proposals and what will work on stuff. But I sound very smart in these meetings because I have reports filled with you and several hundred other evaluators, and sometimes it's just how do you know that much? And I'm literally just reading what Chandler wrote. But thank you. I've delivered the lines well. That makes it sound like I understand them. Oh, but we have proposals sometimes that I've read the whole thing and I have no idea what's happening in there.
Uh-huh.
We're still able to help them because I have hundreds of experts. I can't be stumped anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the most surprising, I think your model is likely to work because as you've alluded to, folks that are good at this sort of thing and have this kind of perspective are interested in sharing it.
Yep.
Certainly that's a cool model. So why would a donor hire Untraditional Philanthropy?
Yep.
They've got I'm sitting around, I got money, and I want to donate it. Why? I can go to their websites. I can do my GuideStar research. I can Google. It's easier to get your questions answered than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these places might even answer the phone or respond to emails, especially if I tell them I'm a big shot donor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what is it? Why would that person hire somebody?
I think it's a great question. And I will say that our model is a little different, and we don't even presume that it's right for everyone, right? I think that the philanthropists that really mesh with our mindset are a subset of open-minded, curious folks who want to do things differently. Maybe because they've been frustrated in the past with their giving, maybe because they've been doing it for a while and they felt like they've not seen the needle move, maybe because they want to make a change in their work. So I would say it falls into three categories. I'd say number one, folks want to increase their impact. Maybe they want to avoid making gifts that they will regret, or they want to give with confidence, or they want to move in a new direction. A lot of these folks have said things to me like, I work with a financial advisor who's fantastic, and I pay them because I want to make sure that we're thinking about this really strategically, that we're doing intense due diligence, that we're making these impact-based decisions with a lot of rigor. And why would I not apply the same thinking to my social impact goals? So I think there's one bucket of people who want to increase impact, and we could talk more about that. I think
one thing you said in there I'm very interested in. Why might a donor regret a gift?
Well, I think
fraud or criminal behavior, they wasted it or whatever. But
all kinds. So I think one, I think there can be both impact ramifications and even reputational ramifications. So there are some nonprofits that are not doing up and up work, and they're doing bad things, or they're doing fiscally irresponsible things, and gifts to those groups not only don't have the impact that one might have wanted, but they, in some cases, can have reputational damage to the donors, especially if donors have done something in a very visible way. So I think, again, just like a private sector investment, you want to reach your in this case, it might be bottom line financial results or bottom line social impact results, and you don't want to have reputational fallout. So I think there are a number of reasons why people wouldn't want to give.
So might they care who the other donors to a cause are, and learn if they might they regret a gift because they learned that so and so who they don't like also gives to that thing?
I mean, someone might.
That depends on the nature of that. I don't mean just they don't get along socially, but that person is untoward in some way. Or let's use Jeffrey. Let's say you've given a donation to First Book, and you find out that Jeffrey Epstein gave to the same fund, and there he is at the same party with you.
It's a great question.
More and more we have people who are getting or they don't have to be as bad as Jeffrey Epstein, right? It could be it could be racist remarks or something else that you find morally abhorrent, and there you are standing with them at something that's supposedly has moral value.
I think it's a great question, and I think there are a few categories. I think one is, obviously, their impact risk, right? You make a gift, you think that it's going to have the impact that you want it to. It ends up not for whatever reason, and there could be reputational negative ramifications because of that. Other people, might give to an organization without sort of fully doing their homework and discover that there's some shady business going on, or that, the impact that the organization says is happening isn't happening. And that can come out in very visible ways, in very scandalous ways, and high-profile donors to scandalous organizations suffer reputational damage. And then I think also there can be maybe a tertiary point that some folks are concerned with is what I might call guilt by association. Maybe there's a person in the world, in another conversation you mentioned Jeffrey Epstein, who is a big...
He donated to a lot of stuff.
Lots of groups. And I could imagine my clients not wanting, say he was on a board or a highly visible sort of behind the scenes force in an organization, which is discoverable, but might not be discoverable to someone who's just doing a quick Charity Navigator search or something like that. So we actually take that due diligence phase really, really seriously, exactly in the same way that these same clients might be hiring a financial advisor to due diligence.
So it's a little bit fraught with peril, especially if we're talking about progressive social change. One thing else, I don't want to name any specific organizations, but whichever one you think I'm talking about, it applies. But every time I see a new progressive liberal group prop up, it's generally a matter of time before I hear the anti-Semitic statement from someone in their leadership. That's been happening for about 10 years. Some that raised hundreds of millions of dollars don't exist anymore because of that. We've read some of those proposals, and it's happened enough times that it doesn't seem like a coincidence.
Yeah.
So if you're a donor trying to get into that sort of thing, whether you're Jewish or not, this can just tank the work.
It's true. And Dave, I don't want to scare people. It
could be a transphobic comment, or it could be an anti-racist comment, or an anti-immigrant comment, or
exactly
a lot of other things.
And again, I don't
gathering all these perspectives together. You run the risk of
yeah, and
bringing some toxic perspective into there.
Well, I will tell you,
we'll have that stuff in my reports sometimes.
Yeah, and one of my experts,
people have biases.
They totally do, and that is an example of something that is hard to discern from the outside. So just last week, one of my experts reached out to me, and she was having a conversation with a high net worth person, and they were having an off the record conversation. And the donor said, my spidey sense is up about organization X or Y, organization X. I feel like, and this donor is a black woman, there's something that I'm just concerned about. And this expert, who is also a black woman, said, let me tell you some behind the scenes information about that organization. Some stuff that's not going to appear in the annual report, some stuff that I know that I think you should know. And this world is small, and the people running these organizations not only know about their organization and not only know about the work that other organizations are doing, they know where some of the bad actors are. And no strategy is foolproof, but I think we purposefully cast a wide net to get a lot of folks who can have input from a lot of perspectives to dramatically decrease the chances of something like that coming up.
So this is very interesting, and again, I think this all highlights the need to, if you're planning to do anything seriously, hiring people who know how to do it to help you do it is a useful idea. And accomplishing social change is as serious as anything else. And I think they may underestimate some of these perils. Another one, and this is particularly true for smaller, under-resourced nonprofits. They will sometimes get a reputation, and I've worked with some of them. They will get a reputation for being a bad place to work. Mm-hmm. And the underlying, and it's true that it is, the underlying reason is because they don't have enough money to provide the support and payment to the staff. Mm-hmm. But the needs of the clients or whoever they're helping are all still real and there. Mm-hmm. And so bosses yell, deadlines need to be met, and it sometimes becomes a stressful environment, and that can be known, right? Mm-hmm. And that boss can get a very bad reputation for being a bad manager, when in reality he was never trained to be a manager. Mm-hmm. And he's upset and stressed because they're doing far more work than any reasonable person could expect. Mm-hmm. The natural thing that happens to people in that position is they start to suffer, and sometimes that suffering manifests outward. Mm-hmm. Right? And then a donor might be like, well, I don't want to give there because I've heard that they mistreat the employees and it's not a great place to work. When, again, the underlying cause for all of that is they didn't have enough money. Mm-hmm. So you're going to deny the solution to the problem because of these reputational things. And I think just all the more reason to have an expert and the ability to talk to folks with perspective so that you can, these are complicated questions. Yeah. Just because you've heard XYZ's got a bad reputation, right? That might just because they're not really focused on the reputation management. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The organizations that have the best reputation are not doing the best work. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They're focused on they're very good at their reputation management. And I have PR staff.
And a lot of our donors want to give to the groups that are making the most impact as opposed to doing the best marketing, right? Which is not to say that some groups doing incredible marketing aren't making a great impact. But I think your point is really important, because take that organization that has been in a consistently resource constrained environment for years, and that's had effects on the morale of the leadership and the staff. You know, my approach would be to have a candid conversation with the donor and say, look, there are two sides to this coin. Like, if you want a straight shot, direct impact gift, you know, with immediate results on this key performance indicator, this might not be the organization for you. We might do another organization that's sort of more robust in this category. But we could also say, look, they've got tremendous potential, and this is the last stumbling block, and they don't have enough money because general operating gifts are so limited, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to have this sort of career development work and, stress management or whatever it might be. But that is solvable with money, and maybe we make a special.
Sector, this is like what they look for.
100%.
And in the donor side, they're like, "Well, I shouldn't donate because of the." But as an investor, like looking for a return, that same outfit would look like a diamond in the rough, and that's like what there's lots of them. That's their strategy.
100%, and they would say we're going to give a gift, and we're going to earmark a certain part of this gift for personal coaching for the CEO.
Well, he needs an executive coach, right?
Yeah, or she needs this or that skill.
They need a PR team. So why else would someone hire a donor advisor to give their money away?
Absolutely. Well, I think one reason we've been discussing is increasing your impact, and there are lots of ways to do and think about that. The second thing that we see a lot of is people who want to build meaning, connection, purpose in their lives. So sort of the first category is about helping make the world a better place by sort of progressive social change, re a certain issue area. The second is much more personal. A lot of times these are entrepreneurs who've built companies and worked really, really hard for a long time, and maybe they've had an exit situation and they are thinking about what they want to do with their time and what meaning they want to have. And I think about this in a few ways. I think one, how can you do more than write a check? A lot of these clients have significant professional experiences. They've built technology companies or communications companies. Are there ways that they can help these organizations with technology or communications questions they might be wrestling with? And there are lots of ways to do that. A big part of that, as you know, is by connections and introductions to others in the space. I think another thing that we see a lot of are folks who are interested in sort of transitioning from donor to advocate. So how can they, be an advocate for this cause, for this organization? And that can take a lot of forms, up to and including board membership. And I think too, meaning is really important. I've spoken to people and asked about their philanthropy, and they've said things like, well, we've given $5 million away, as opposed to saying, we've helped increase literacy rates by 10% in our community. Or, I personally, my life is richer and more fulfilling because of the work that I do with this organization. Let me tell you about that. So I think that's one big category. And the last big category, and increasingly so, is I think about engaging family members and sort of thinking about one's legacy. And you and I were talking about that, the legacy part, a little bit earlier in the sort of reputational section. But I think this is a big thing. We're looking at probably the largest intergenerational wealth transfer that's happened in our country. And people have different points of view about when or if or exactly how that's going to happen. But
I don't believe it. But telling me about, just to be clear, they've been telling me about that my whole life, and all that happens is the number keeps getting bigger.
I do hear that.
And it's not transferring. And in many cases, even being held on to after death. There's a really great book that you should read, The Rising Power of the American Dead.
The Rising Power of the American Dead.
The dead control more assets than they ever had, almost as much as the living.
I think it's a really interesting question.
They shouldn't control any assets.
I agree.
I have all the respect for what they did when they were alive and everything, and I'll be quiet in the cemetery, nice and respectful and everything. But they shouldn't. Their funds should no longer be like
totally
abiding by their wishes.
And I think the good news is,
only because they can't change their minds
after they're gone. Yeah. And a lot of families are thinking about that. So a lot of families are saying, how do we develop a personal or a family philanthropic plan? And as you probably know from this conversation, as I know you know, Dave, I am big on planning and strategy and structure. So thinking through that plan or approach, maybe it's a year-long plan, maybe it's an 18-month plan, maybe it's a 10-year plan, maybe it's a 40-year plan. I think thinking about the long term is also really important. I don't have a lot of success with folks who come to me and say, we want to change X or Y overnight. A lot of those of us who have been working in the field for a long time understand that change takes time. And so, especially if you're looking at entrenched systems. So we do a lot of that long-term planning. And I think the third thing here is engaging younger generations, second and third generation philanthropists. We were talking about this a little bit ago. It's a big question, and different families do it in different ways. Some bring the whole group in and decide on their focus areas together and their organizations that they're going to support together. Others sort of segment and give each family member a little piece of money to enable them to look at their philanthropy independently. So we work with folks on both sides of that question. So I think those are three things that we're seeing a lot of folks want to talk about and that we're doing a lot of work in.
The intergenerational thing is good. And certainly definitely important. I've heard from other folks. And just to add in some extra perspective on this, I have talked to some of the big investment houses and asked them why they get into philanthropy advising. And they've, in some cases, been, and I appreciate it, quite honest and candid that they want to keep the funds in the firm, and giving philanthropy advising is useful, particularly on this intergenerational aspect.
Yep.
Right. We'll call the Bank of David. Right? I have this $100 million client, and he's got $100 million invested. Obviously, he won't live forever. When he passes, I would love for as much of that $100 million to stay at the Bank of David as possible, right? Yep. And I know that, Jimmy Jr., right, very interested in causes, because the next generation is very interested in causes. So I'm like, I'm a philanthropy expert now. And I throw the Bank of David Next Generation Leadership Conference and invite fancy celebrities, and then the kid gets to think he's involved in philanthropy. He's more likely to keep the funding at my bank. And in fact, there might be some good gifts that get made along the way, but I've heard it from the top of some organizations that there's a very narrow focus here for getting into the work from that. If it's a large bank doing this, it's wealth management. Any wealth management firm wants to manage the largest fund possible, so they're collecting clients with as much money as possible. And if you are an ultra high net worth individual, or even a high net worth individual, or in fact, honestly, anyone with any amount of excess wealth, you're probably considering making some donations. So anyone helping to manage that wealth, it should be part of it. And sometimes they do have, in fact, actual philanthropic experts. One of my favorite things to do is to whenever I see, you can look up their LinkedIn, and I try to look like, where did any of your philanthropy expertise come from? And it's just, they worked at the bank, they worked at the bank, they worked at the bank.
I totally hear what you're saying.
They were working in sustainability for a very long time, and then at one point it became the foundation.
Yeah, and
they were like a different job, a lateral shift possibly, right? And everything that got the work seems to be the same, but now it's called the foundation, and it's philanthropy that they do.
I really appreciate that, and I hesitate to call myself a philanthropy expert. I really think of myself as a person who spent their life focused on leading social change efforts, and while I work with a lot of banks and a lot of financial advisors, I'm not a financial advisor. So I am not the person that's going to tell a client how much money they should give away, or even necessarily the financial structure or financial vehicle that they should use, whether it's a donor advised fund or a charter member trust, whatever it might be. I can help people think through that. But typically for us, the individual or the family and their financial advisor will sort of make those decisions. And then when they say, now we need an expert to think about how to make the most good in the world with this money, they call us. And that is sort of liberating, because we could focus purely on the impact.
And process-wise, it's somewhat similar to how the ultra-high net worth individuals of the past did things.
Mm-hmm.
They took care of managing their money first.
Yep.
With their banker or whoever it was. Back then, they were just called bankers, not their wealth managers.
Mm-hmm.
But they took care of that first, and they figured out how much, and usually set up a foundation with writing a check to my own name foundation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then and maybe if it was big enough, hired a professional to run the foundation, which is now there's different vehicles. It's probably an advised fund at the wealth manager.
Yep.
To my earlier point, they want all the money there. So they don't want the money to leave the corpus to go set up a foundation. They can, and there's advantage to having them continue to manage it.
Mm-hmm.
Then separating them, right? Because that means sometimes that means splitting up stock groups and other things. Especially some of these families have stock not readily available, and other interesting assets like that, right? And having it all there, there's some benefit to that for sure, and also not really what I do. Yeah. I would prefer to hear after they've figured out how much they can give away. I would love to be involved in the conversation once you've figured out a number, right? Yep. And the process used to be very clear. And in fact, the guidance was like, if it's at least $1 million, then you go through the trouble of setting up a private foundation, which is paperwork with the IRS and a 5% minimum. And for a long time, that's what our wealthiest
costs associated with that.
I actually don't know anyone that set up a private foundation.
Yeah,
there's some cost, but like if you've got $1 million, give away the cost is not negligible, and a good way to give things away. As a fundraiser, I liked that. Their tax returns were public. I could look up what their grants were. I could do my research. I knew who to approach. Right? They had to list their board members. It was like I was able to do my job early in my career. Right? Most of your newer vehicles aren't that transparent. They're very difficult to research. Lots of donors are giving them individually, not accepting proposals at all, not taking meetings. That stuff's all very difficult. And one of the reasons we really want to, why we're interviewing giving advisors, and why I'm choosing giving advisors that I believe can be candid about it, right? Is that's the thing. That's why we want to leave the door open. An open door philanthropy. How are they, right? Not everybody can set up a huge foundation and hire a huge staff and read proposals from all over the world.
100%.
If you can. If you've got $1 billion, if you're like, this is why Bezos just says he's going to give all his money away. Cool. Right? Set up, I'm happy, let's show me the paperwork, sir. You can put it into a fund and put bylaws there and do this now. Instead of signing some meaningless pledge. Or like indicating that you will sign a pledge, which is all he needs to do to get the media coverage. There's probably people in the world who think he's already given all his money away, right? Also, I think last week he gave $100 million to Dolly Parton, which we could probably do a whole episode. I'm a huge fan, but you shouldn't give her $100 million. That's crazy.
Yeah, Dolly does incredible
She should
work.
Immediately donate it to like SEIU or someone trying to do unionization efforts.
I think she's going to be. I'm excited to see what she does because she's so
Amazon
freaking
Union.
thoughtful. But I hear you. I totally hear you, Dave.
You shouldn't be able to work on your own like bad public image by donating money like huge amounts to a celebrity. That stuff's and some donor advisor probably told him, look, Dolly's really, when it comes to philanthropy, Dolly's really like, she's a celebrity, she has this huge following. Like they probably did studies on like the people who hate Jeff Bezos, they're more likely this is the best person to do this to, right? That's how these folks make decisions at that level. You're not like that $100 million doesn't come on your way unless you're Dolly Parton, unless you are able to help him with his reputational issues, right? And there's also like, and I have spoken to many recipients of funding from Mackenzie Scott and others who make their decisions behind closed doors, where I've never had the opportunity to like talk to them. I can only imagine how they're doing these things, but I have to imagine that since they're not talking directly to donors before the gifts. But some of this has to do with what we were talking about earlier. Who are the best marketed programs?
Well, I think
and that's who's getting. And if you look at at anyone who gives money that way, it's probably going to be a list of pretty well marketed programs with good social media and good branding. And
I think that's part of it. Though I have been impressed by Mackenzie Scott's work, and I, like you, I've never been in that room where those discussions happen, but. Not all of her programs have been super, super well known, and I theorize that there is probably a sort of series of behind the scenes due diligence things that are happening. I mean, I know that I get calls, and the experts I work with get calls from, I'm not speaking about her specifically, but I'm sure you get these calls as well.
Many people get, and I've been told that like it wasn't out of the blue. It always gets reported like it was out of the blue, but all of them were like, no, we heard like someone called and asked some questions, and there was always like a few steps, and then but there is always my other reason why I think it's marketing related is there is always like a substantial press effort every time there's a round of giving there, right?
I mean,
some people give without issuing a press release,
and I
don't
get
even large gifts.
Totally does, and I feel like most of the press releases that I've seen, and I don't claim to have exhaustive knowledge, have been from the Funded organization as opposed to being from
but we're giving you a gift.
Who
you will obviously be issuing. Here's the press release.
Who knows? Who knows what goes along with that?
I have a lot of reason to believe that that the press release comes pre-written when the check arrives.
Yeah, and I have no knowledge about that.
No, and that's a very good PR strategy. Forbes 30 under 30.
Yep. I mean, I certainly, if I got a gift,
all these people are going to tweet that they got onto the award. Yeah, right? And in fact, it's not that they require to. But Forbes does say, like, here's the template for the tweet you can write. Mm-hmm. Like, this is obviously what they want you to do. Mm-hmm. And it happens, and it gets... what the main benefactor of that list every year is Forbes.
Yeah, I
not the 900 people on the 30 under 30. Just to be clear, there's 900 people on that list of 30 people.
So I hear all that, Dave. And I think...
the core question though, right, is if you're giving money away, there's some sort of process.
Yes.
Maybe you are literally throwing darts at the wall. That would be a process. Our process is I throw darts at a wall and I give the grant to whatever land. Like there's a process. Your process probably sucks as ad hoc, right, and last minute, and maybe you don't read all the materials. Like that's a lot of the processes have that going on. Mm-hmm. There's some really great ones, right?
Yep.
And I have never heard of a perfect philanthropic process, not even close.
Yeah,
all of them will either like you'll tend towards people you know or the issues that are closest to you, or the like best marketed things, or like or like the things that make you feel the fanciest, right? Mm-hmm. We like being kissed up to, right? But I assume some of hiring an advisor is like, what will my process be? When do my checks go out? Will I read proposals? Right, like if we're doing our own research, what does that look like? Will I use a rubric of some kind? Mm-hmm. Is that up to them as well? Is that up to them as well? Talk me through the process stuff.
Well, yes. Let me say one last thing about Mackenzie Scott, and then let's talk about process.
Sure.
And I think they do connect. I think one thing that she is doing incredibly well that I hope more philanthropists follow in her footsteps is doing robust due diligence, and none of us know exactly how that happens, right? And then she makes general operating gifts. I think that's really important for people to hear and realize. She's not micromanaging the process. She's picking leadership teams and organizations that she believes in. She's saying, I trust your work, and I want you to go forth and do more of that. And I think that is a trend in philanthropy whose time has come.
And we talked about multi-year general operating gifts quite a bit during the symposium.
Yes,
for folks who want to listen.
Yep.
And one of the things we mentioned there, so she has so much money that she can do that again and again. Yep. Most philanthropists will run out of money giving away $10 million in general operating at a clip, right? Multi-year and committing to that much, right? Yep. And so there is some reason for, right, and by resource constrained, I might mean like less than $1 billion, right? They may be nonetheless looking to have substantial impact with their mere $400 million.
Yep.
Right? And they may want to consider, like if you want Alzheimer's cured, right? You'll want to make sure you're giving it to a researcher with some promise. Mm-hmm. You may want to restrict it in some ways.
Yep.
Right, and you should make sure they've covered their operations, because that won't cure Alzheimer's either if the lights aren't on.
Exactly.
Right, but if you don't there's some reason to, if you're looking for a specific outcome to ask for that outcome when you give them the money.
I agree with that. And I think too, and I do want to get back to your process question, but I know when we were running, and I've been on the...
Which related, generally, that's a process tactic.
Totally.
And she is giving, and I would expect behind the research folks to be giving, like, people who gave that way historically, it's been restricted sometimes.
Absolutely. And
that's what's new. Like, giving behind closed doors is not new.
Right. but an increased focus on general operating, I think, is, and I feel like when I started this work 25 years ago, general operating gifts were almost like a dirty word, and people would be proud, donors would sometimes be proud that their gift was
a best practice at one
100%
point.
Restricted. Yeah, and that's something
that... Don't give to anyone if they have operating expenses. Like, I've heard people say that.
Right.
I don't understand why nonprofits have operating expenses at all. I've heard people say that out loud.
And... and we would sometimes groups would say to us like,
they can get office space donated, they can get this donated. Why don't they just go to like I have a law firm do it pro bono? They'd say the silliest, dumbest things.
Like
we live in the world and everything costs money.
We had a staff of 90, and
inflation,
and we can't pay them in hugs or donated office furniture. So I think, and I know from doing this for 25 years that the general operating funds that we raised were the most critically important and the very hardest to fundraise for. So I think this shift in dynamic is really important. So in terms of process, and obviously every donor is different, every approach is different. So I'm trying to be as helpful as I can to your question because it is quite broad. But I think there's a process for choosing your strategy, and then there's a process for implementing that strategy. There's sort of a process that an advisor and a donor go through to figure out what the strategy will be, and then there's a process for the nonprofits to receive the money, right? And I could talk about both of those. I think that the thing I'll say about the first is, some philanthropists have a very high desire to get deep in the weeds and review very closely every proposal that comes in. Others will say, here are the parameters that I'm focusing on. These are the concepts that are important to me. These are the impact goals that I care about. And could you do an initial screen and make a recommendation, and I'll choose from a group of 4 instead of a group of unlimited number, right? So there's a lot of stuff that can go into that. And, nonprofits can interface with that process in a lot of ways. So when I was running a nonprofit and running fundraising, it was super frustrating to me not to understand what was going on behind those closed doors. So I think one thing that I'll say is, regardless of what your process is, I really encourage donors to be very candid and straightforward about it. So to say, for example, we are not taking unsolicited proposals. We are doing our own research. Please don't reach out to us. Sort of a don't call us, we'll call you.
Yes.
I didn't like that answer as a nonprofit because I wanted to be in the conversation, but I much preferred that answer to no answer, in which case I might have spent hours writing a letter to that organization that would never read it,
This has come up on the show many times. And as far as I can tell, there's generally consensus around this. And despite there being the consensus, we're not acting the way that we all agree that we should. So philanthropy is the realm of the do-gooder, right? Mm-hmm. And we want to feel good about what we're doing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So negative and critical things are often like, it seems inappropriate, right? Because we should all be very happy and right and supportive and great, right? So for me, I'm giving critical feedback. Sometimes I tell these people what they're doing wrong, and I'm the first person to ever most people would never dream of telling some unfunded nonprofit what are they doing wrong, right? Seems like a kicking somebody while they're down, but they do generally want that. One of the most common questions I hear from them, right, are how do I approach, I think this philanthropist has, and I've been hearing this my whole life, the moment I find out, people find out I'm a fundraiser, right, long before unfunded list. Sometimes they know this one person, they read an article, they know he cares about this issue, maybe it even said, he's donating to those causes, right? One of the first things I raised money for was youth rights. And Steve Wozniak once in like 1984, like briefly mentioned that he thought the voting age should be 16.
Mm-hmm.
And my boss there was like, "We need to go after Steve Wozniak because he said this in this article 20 years ago." I'm like, that doesn't sound like. Do you know him?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you know anybody? Do you know anybody who thinks he knows him? Like, if we run into him, it's great that we know that he said this.
Yep. Yep.
And I think that's really all we can do here. He does not have a foundation. There's no official process to approach. There's like no realistic strategy for meeting Steve Wozniak. So we need to move on to something that we can actually do. And again, the number one question is for me is I would like to be able to approach this donor. They've come to me specifically because they think Dave will be able to help me connect to this person.
Yeah.
Sometimes I could. I might actually know that guy, and making the introduction would be useful. And I don't because I know what their process is, and that they don't fund this thing.
Yep.
They don't, and they're like they're really they think it's that I'm the key. All I got to do is this intro, and then of course they'll be able to convince them, and they won't. They need to go and find something that is a fit. They're trying to play tennis on the basketball court, and it doesn't matter how good you are at tennis.
I completely agree. I had a call like that yesterday. I think
you're not allowed to have a racket out there. You're just gonna foul every time.
Yeah. For the youth development organization that desperately wants to talk to Steve Wozniak, and I realize this is an old example, I agree with you that is not necessarily the best strategy. The answer is not to submit an unsolicited grant proposal or an unsolicited letter of inquiry. It's just not, friends. If you are bound and determined to approach Steve Wozniak, I would spend time thinking about who do I know, or who on my board, or who on our organization might know him.
There's lots of people out there. They're like, Mackenzie Scott can make all our dreams come true, and she can.
Yep. And like,
so naturally they're trying to figure it out.
And I worked at First Book for 18 years, and if I had $1 for every person that suggested that we reach out to Oprah, we wouldn't have had to do any more fundraising. There are ways.
We get comments in the report sometimes. They're like, "Have you considered applying to the Gates Foundation?"
So there are.
Thank Bill, you. Is he a philanthropist?
So there are ways. Yeah. There are ways to work your network to see if you know someone who knows someone, to have a conversation, exactly as you mentioned. Though even if you have a conversation, that's not going to necessarily change their funding strategy to include you in it. What I would say to those folks is very similar to what you said. I think you're fundamentally thinking about the question backwards. So instead of thinking about how can I get to this funder that doesn't know me or my work, I would think, who knows me and my work that might be a funder? Like if you're a local nonprofit organization, you rent your office space from someone, presumably. You purchased internet and phone and power from other providers. You buy your food from local restaurants. You provide services to schools or shelters or whatever that are connected to the U.S. government. There are already stakeholders in your world who are deeply familiar with the life-changing work that you're doing and can speak to that from a firsthand experience. So, I've seen groups do an exercise where they kind of map out all of their touch points in a community or in a state or in a country, and then sort of cross-reference that with who among these are funders. We buy all of our, after-school program supplies from Walmart and Costco. Is there a local Walmart or Costco community giving fund that we might apply to? We've been purchasing our materials from them for 10 years, and we have this great record of success. And that can just spiral on and on to utilities providers, gas companies, all kinds of folks. So I think a lot of folks think that they might not know funders, and they actually do.
What's important, I think most people, even people who don't have excess wealth, donate money. Especially in this country. And we are a little bit of a celebrity-obsessed culture. And so we often have a tendency to think to really go to the very top. And where there is a lot of coverage of these folks and their big flashy gifts. There are just billionaires. There's thousands of billionaires, right? But exclude them. You're probably not ever going to meet. Let's forget about it for a second. There's an untold number of people with hundreds of millions, tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Right? And quite frankly, having $900 million doesn't make you famous.
Right.
Right? But it does mean you can solve all of all of a nonprofit's problems just as easily as someone with like $1 trillion or whatever ridiculous amount these folks have. It's hard to keep track. The numbers keep going up.
It's so true. And these organizations...
But in your own community, one of the things I mention a lot is a lot of times they're founding this nonprofit in San Francisco, D.C., or New York, but they're like from a town. Who's the richest person in your town? They're probably pretty proud of the fact that somebody from like their high school is making it big and like doing something on a cause and might be good for.
It's all about those authentic connections.
And that's something you can get to. A cold submission to him might work.
100%.
He's not Oprah. He's not getting. He didn't have to hire people as gatekeepers to keep
to say no.
Keep folks away from him.
I think the other thing to look at is your volunteer base. If you're a volunteer-based organization, like
there should be some way for people to volunteer so you can meet people interested.
All
of my donors volunteer and read proposals first. I've never had anybody donate before they.
And then if you maybe you send an email out to all of your volunteers to say like, hey, look, we're looking at community and family foundations in our area. If you happen to know anyone, and then all of a sudden you've got someone who can authentically say, look, I have personally volunteered with this organization for 5 years. I've seen firsthand the power of X, Y, and Z, and I want to urge you personally to consider this. So I think that because so many social enterprises and nonprofits have been in such a resource-constrained environment for such a long time, they assume that they don't have these connections, and they're often more there than they first imagine.
Yes. So we've talked about quite a bit, and you were. We also had you for a while at the virtual symposium. And you are an evaluator with Unfunded List and a verbose one. Right, so people have who engage with us lots of opportunity to hear your perspective, which is very valuable to folks. I'm going to ask just a few more questions, and we touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to hear a nice full answer. Right, so once we've chosen, at some point in this process, we're choosing an issue, right, like climate change or some other issue, right, and you've talked a little bit about, right, the things they can do beyond the donation.
Yep.
Right. Like for a long time, philanthropy shied away from political advocacy, going down to the tried to keep those things separate from each other. But they are kind of intertwined. And in general, lots of times, what the government is doing is figuring out like what will they fund versus what will philanthropy fund. And in fact, the only other instance of the term unfunded list being used is government programs listing things that made the criteria, but they didn't have the allotment from Congress.
Yep.
Right. If you Google unfunded list, it's me and a bunch of like unfunded but worthy government programs.
Yep.
That the allotment wasn't there. So like, what is our response over the next century as we and the future generation gives away this 30 trillion or 50 trillion or 100 trillion if it ever gets handed down, right? What's the like beyond the philanthropic process? How do they engage? Because it's a crowded world. There's lots of people screaming about issues. It's probably not to just go to Twitter and post.
Yeah. I mean, a couple things come to my mind. I think asking ourselves what we can do to decrease the problems in the first place is the place that my mind goes. So thinking about from an environmental perspective, what can we do, not only in our own homes, but as, I referenced Xander's letter to President Biden, as active participating members of a democratic society, what can we do? What choices are we making with our money in terms of the products that we buy, the companies that we support? All of this, as you know, is connected together. And I think the other thing that I just always have to say in this conversation is, check ourselves to try to anticipate what we don't know. I think about this especially with regard to representation in terms of decision making. It's a lot of pressure. I'm feeling pressure to answer this question now because I'm one guy and it's a big question. The way untraditional philanthropy would answer this is, I'd send this question out to our team of 40 experts who include all of these diverse people from all of these diverse perspectives, and I would invite them to give me each 2 or 3 suggestions, and that answer would be so much more holistic than anything I can come up with right now.
But at the very level, certainly there's funders of an issue have some responsibility beyond the check.
I think so.
If you want to go out, especially if you want to go out there and say, hey, I'm solving climate change, you need to be doing something other than just writing checks to organizations. The best way to solve it would be to do additional things.
And there's some people who can't.
You can't continue to vote for climate change denying politicians.
Yes.
No matter how much you're donating. Because there's only so much the philanthropy sector is going to be able to do on many issues. Mm-hmm. We will need our friends in government.
Yeah.
And I've had the chance to meet a few senators.
Mm-hmm.
And almost always, and it's probably because of who I am, but I almost always talk about a foundation with them.
Mm-hmm.
They are aware of the foundations and the big donors in their area.
Mm-hmm.
That's obviously they need their political fundraising, but that's quite a bit different world, usually from different corpuses. And individually, it's much like an individual can write huge check to causes, they can't write to campaigns. Your voice will ring out quite a bit. If you're a considerable local donor supporting nonprofits in the area where that U.S. senator lives, like they're gonna hear about your concerns, and if you don't say anything, then they're gonna hear something about somebody else's concerns.
Yeah,
there's gonna be people talking.
Mm-hmm.
Our motto at Unfunded List is listen, learn, speak, and I do think for a very long time, philanthropy sat and listened and learned.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
and then eventually someone was like, "Can we have some impact, please?" And then have been trying to speak more, but that's you. I get criticized for speaking too much, a lot, right? And in my defense, I'm like, well, maybe you don't speak enough, and I wouldn't have to. There's an awful lot of problems, and I don't really hear a lot of chirping about some of them, which is why I find the need to talk so much. Absolutely, especially if you're funding something that has opposition. Climate change has there's people who don't think it's real. Mm-hmm. So it's not enough to just go out and say, "Oh, I'm very concerned about climate change. I want to fund it." Right?
Yeah.
Right. At the very least, you can follow the lead of how old is Xander?
He's 7.
He's 7, and he can do something about it.
Yep.
So you're a big hotshot donor in your community. You can do something about it too.
Yeah, totally agree.
And that might even involve hiring an additional advisor or consultant.
Mm-hmm.
These folks, you can hire. You want a law passed to benefit your business, you hire a lobbyist. But if you want a law passed to protect the world, we don't necessarily consider doing that. Although we did once read a proposal that was about that. Someone wanted to raise money to actually pay lobbyists to work on real causes. It was a good idea. I hope what feedback was helpful to him. And I hope this episode has been helpful to the people listening. 2 more questions. What are you most excited about in philanthropy?
I really do think that sort of a new era of philanthropists, or maybe donors who don't think of themselves as philanthropists, are getting engaged. And I think that there's an increased desire to sort of reimagine the power dynamic between the funders and the funded. And I think that power dynamic is something that's overdue to change. Now, I'm obviously super aware of the money that funders have and how critically important that is to nonprofits and social enterprises. And so is our whole society, right? But I think I'm advocating that there's also a great deal that donors can learn from leading social entrepreneurs, things that can help them do their work more effectively, become better, more effective board members, a lot of things that can begin to level out, if not equalize, that dynamic. Because here's the thing that happens. If you have a power dynamic that is significant, the person without the power is less able to be candid and honest, especially if they have bad news.
Yeah.
And so I know for a long time, I would spend a lot of time being truthful in the reporting that we did, but presenting that truth in the most palatable way possible and presenting negative aspects in the most honest but palatable way possible. And first of all, it just takes a freaking long time to spend so much time articulating yourself that way. And then we'd have a few donors who would just be super candid and say, look, gosh, tell me the biggest thing that you're struggling with right now. Tell me the thing that keeps you up at night. And those conversations, which usually need to be opened by the funder, I believe, created a space in which I could be candid and honest and real and say, look, oh my goodness, we've got a big problem with our, I don't know, email communication system that's managing our relationship with all of our recipient groups. And let me tell you how much better the world would be for our organization if we could fix that. And then you're in a very different conversation. So I would say, in summary, reimagining the dynamic between the funder and the funded to encourage candor and transparency as a way to dramatically increase impact.
Right before I founded Unfunded List, there were many things that inspired me to do it. And in particular, there was one thing that I've heard from successful fundraisers. I've heard some version of this many times, right? Basically, they pay the bill, so I will do what they say.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard very impactful nonprofit leaders say that about their donors in a jokingly way, but I've heard it enough times.
Yeah, there's a kernel of truth there.
And there's one particular instance. I was on a tour of a museum, and we were on a thing that was funded by a foundation. And we were given the tour by one of the leading researchers in that field, who was there because he felt he had to be, because the person funding his research was making him give the tour. He wasn't a tour guide, and his resentment was clear, vocalized. Right? And the first thing he said, "Hello, I'm here. I'm the leader in this field. This is demeaning to me to have to give you little shits a tour." Like he was insulting to us the entire time. But he had to do it. And I just remember thinking, that's not, he's a talented, capable researcher. He shouldn't feel this way.
Mm-hmm.
If the funder truly wants to see this research done well, should not be can make him feel that way, clearly.
Yeah, totally.
But just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. So I'm excited about that as well.
Mm-hmm.
I would also say that not just because someone's fundraising doesn't mean we should listen to everything that they say.
Correct.
Obviously,
totally correct.
It's I need money. I got that. Right. It's not going to be a surprise that you need money. And I'm, oh, you're fundraising? I've heard people say that to me in meetings, and I'm like, did you really not know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's always, if you're meeting with someone who works in a nonprofit, it is partially a fundraising meeting because they would like a gift. There might be other things that they talk about, right? But absolutely, they're fundraising in there. And sometimes people who are affected by an issue, we need to hear their perspective. But the fact that they're affected by that issue does compromise their ability.
Mm-hmm.
And their for instance, if someone has been traumatized heavily,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
We can't expect them to go to work to solve the thing that traumatized them. We need to hear from them. But they might not be able to put in the 40 hours a week or honestly the 100 hours a week that we would like, and we're doing that to some of them right now.
Mm-hmm.
The listening is much more. It's a challenge from both sides, and an ongoing thing. You are obviously you're here on the show because you're advising philanthropists. Who do you want to be advising? Some of the folks listening to this season might very well be listening because they're interested in hiring a giving advisor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, love the question. So we tend to work with, and I don't really love these terms, but they're terms that people use: high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals, families.
Do you have a I've heard different dollar amounts behind that. Is there?
I feel like people use different numbers all the time. I think,
I tend to think 10 million for high net worth,
and some
that's
people say
that's your whole family,
30 million and up for ultra high net worth.
Or even
as
higher, really 100 million. There's so many people with over 100 million that it's a category on its own, I think.
And I think the interesting,
because that's a lot of money. Obviously.
Totally. And so a lot of our folks kind of fall into that upper category. They're not large enough to hire a full-time sort of philanthropic advisor, but they're doing enough work that it is too much for them to kind of manage themselves. And so oftentimes we come in as kind of like a fractional chief philanthropic advisor for someone that's in that sort of maybe 30 million to 500 million category. Mackenzie Scott has a whole team of people helping her with this. She doesn't need us. But there are a lot of people that are doing very significant giving who don't need a full-time person. So we come in, I always like to mention names because I like not to be vague, though a lot of our folks do value their anonymity, and we take that very seriously. One person I'll mention because it's really important to me personally is a philanthropist in Western North Carolina, Blue Ridge Mountains, very focused on sort of the intersection of economic development initiatives and the arts in sort of rural Appalachian communities. Her name's Gina Phillips. She's the president of the Samuel L. Phillips Family Foundation and has been doing amazing work for years.
I've heard that there's cool art out there. I think Steve Martin lives out there.
It's this amazing artistic community. That's right, because you have a North Carolina connection as well.
That I've been meaning to visit, that I've heard is just like, downtown art scene is a really big deal. There's funders and everything.
So Asheville obviously has a big art scene. This community, Spruce Pine, North Carolina, and Mitchell County. Mitchell County has the Penland School of Craft, which is one of the, at the forefront of so much of innovative craft work in the country. And as you can see, I could go on and on about this, but this funder was so much fun to work with because we took a very holistic approach. We brought in stakeholders from across the community, and word began to spread. So folks across the state paid attention. The North Carolina School of the Arts got involved. The Keenan Institute gave us some additional funding. So it's a great example of bringing all these folks together. There are more examples on our site. Some families that folks might know. Julia Pritzker-Vlock has some kind words to say. Martha Molina Bernadette from the Molina Family Foundation. And there are a number of corporates as well. Pizza Hut, Mars, a number of other, Wells Fargo folks that your listeners
I was in
might
more
be
than
heard
one.
of.
I was in more than one Pizza Hut commercial. Next time you are.
Well,
next time you're meeting.
There you go.
I said hello. I have. It's been a while since I used to really love it there. I remember I read sometime that like once upon a time, like all the kale being purchased by Pizza Hut to like decorate the salad bar.
Wow.
And then kale became a like trendy food to eat.
And
but at one point in human
gone?
history, it was just like they were the only ones who bought 90% of all the kale. I don't know. For all I know, it's still. I'm not sure they're still doing the salad bar. But the corporate giving is a lot of the proposals that we read. Mm-hmm. I think they are obviously marketing is part of that, right? It's a corporation, so the folks who are just beginning and starting to target things are like really likely to find them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Especially if that's a business that's doing business in their community, then they will have already heard of them and associate them with funding and all that. That's a lot. It's a disproportionately high number of the proposals we read at unfunded list, and I've seen it be a really great springboard for a lot of groups because for all time it's been true that there's benefit to being a good corporate citizen.
Yep.
Supporting local groups. I like about your story is that this is somebody who's local to Western North Carolina and hired an advisor who also knows and is from the area, right? And focus on some of the causes there in a natural way. I do think there is a tendency to be like, I mean, honestly, it's a cliche at this point for donors to be. I had a significant donor tell me that recently I've become very concerned about climate change, and I've decided to focus my philanthropy on climate change. Like this, she told me this year, and I don't know what to say to that sort of thing. I'm like, I've been where I was 6 when I watched Captain Planet,
right?
And so that's my whole life. And so my whole life, you've just been there with money, giving it, not caring about this, that. I mean, I'm glad that they're there, but that's the sort of that's one. Everybody should have some climate change in their portfolio because they all live on the planet and enjoy the climate, right? Mm-hmm. And I would say if they ever listen to music, they should probably be doing something to fund musicians, right? And all of that. When you choose your issue, it's not it doesn't necessarily need to be a big national global thing, right? We're not all going to become UN delegates, right? You're going if it's impact and family you're interested in, which you've said a lot of your clients are, that local strategy is going to give them what they need.
And I think in the best case,
important and we were talking about that on the fundraising side as well, right? Look for people in your local community. That's going to be a much better fit.
And I think in the best case, it weaves together a lot of things that you've always known to be true about yourself. but haven't really thought about in exactly that way. So this person has always been a fan of the arts, has always loved her community, has always wanted to help folks in that community. But for so long, those were kind of three different pieces of her life. And then realized that there's a certain intersectionality between them, which actually isn't a broadening of focus, it's a narrowing of focus because you're focusing on that intersection. And it's something that is so people now who hear what she's doing say, well, that makes complete sense. Knowing you for your whole life, this makes total sense as the thing that you would focus on. And I think and I can't take credit for that synergy because she came up with that herself before we started talking. But I think for so many folks, that's the work that we do, trying to think about the authentic components of their life and how those can be pieced together into a way that drives real impact and generates true meaning individually and personally for them.
Well, it's very interesting work. That's why we've chosen to interview people doing it. It is one of the fastest growing fields in the world, right? And you're part of that trend. You've been a trendsetter most of your life, right? Best of luck with it. One last chance to plug it. It is untraditionalphilanthropy.com.
Yes.
And you've got your website up, and people can
check out the website. We've got a page that talks about all we do. Also, a page that talks about what we don't do, which is actually one of my very favorite pages. There's some surprising tidbits there, so check it out, and we would love to talk more.
Absolutely. And also, if you send us a proposal this spring, maybe Chandler will be one of your reviewers. If it's a literacy proposal, almost certain. That's pretty much what I generally assign to him. Stuff about young folks. But although now I've learned a lot more about you, you might be getting more
a broader list.
Interesting source. Certainly now, if I get West North Carolina arts,
economic development, love it.
Yeah, those might be coming your way now.
Love it.
All right, thank you very much for joining us,
and thank you for having me.
And thank you, David Jaffe, as always. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Good luck with your fundraising and your grant making. Have a good night.
Yay.